Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's SB20 session 5, which is all about tuning and SB20. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are tonight, and in Hobart that's the Morninga people, and pay my respects to elders past and emerging. We're absolutely thrilled to have as our special guests tonight Andrew Lechte and Darren Twirler Jones. Andrew, just a bit of background. Andrew grew up in Melbourne, sailing dinghies, mainly skiffs, but also mirrors and 420s. His first work was sailmaking with Frank Hammond in Melbourne, then with Lee Dorrington back last century. I don't know how old you are there, Andrew, but you don't look that old. He moved to Japan in 1988 and was working for Diamond Sails Japan. The company then merged with North Sails Japan. Through the Japan loft, he was working with the Nippon Challenge for the America's Cup team in 1992, 95 and 2000. Then again, Victory Challenge Sweden in 2003 and with the French team Arriva in 2007. Andrew has also worked with 4 Volvo ocean race teams, with the last one at Camper ETN in 2012. Andrew has worked closely with individuals on sail development for Olympic and Paralympic classes such as fins, 470s, Sona, Star, 2.4s and NACRA. Andrew is currently working half-time with Australian Sailing as a technical assistant and half-time with Doyle Sails New Zealand as a senior design consultant. Welcome, Andrew. Darren Twirler Jones is joining us again from South Australia. Welcome, Darren. Darren has won multiple world championships in the FAR 30, FAR 40, Swan 45 and 12 metre classes, and he's won 9 Australian championships in Etchells 22, Melges 32, FAR 30, FAR 40, SB20 and IRC classes. Darren is arguably one of the best SB20 boat tuners in Australia and possibly the world. So in a nutshell, these guys know what they're talking about way more than I do, and welcome to you both.
Thanks, Jane.
My co-host tonight is our Hobart-based sailor, Andy Roberts. Andy's been sailing SB20 since the class began in Hobart and is a member of Steve Catchpool's Team Rebellion. So just a reminder, tonight we are recording the session, so if you've got mates that are on your team that aren't able to be on tonight, they'll be able to pick up the recording on our SB20 Australia YouTube channel. The video will be up probably by tomorrow morning. Usually I can get it up tonight, but tomorrow morning. So Andrew is going to show us a technical presentation tonight, and Andrew and Twirler and Andy will pretty much carry the night. I might be able to photograph boats, but I definitely can't sail them, so I'll take a bit more of a back seat. And Andrew's also agreed to share his slides from tonight's presentation, so I'll get those out to you via email and let you know on social media where those are, so look out for those. We're going to be taking questions throughout the evening, but we might just try and let Andrew run through his presentation just seamlessly as we can. We've already got quite a few questions from people about tonight, and we'll have a good Q&A towards the end, probably at least 10 or 15 minutes. So if you haven't got a question up yet, that's cool. You can just send those through on the chat. So that's it from me. Andrew, Andy, Darren, over to you.
Okay, maybe I'll just share my screen and we'll just go from there, I guess. Yeah, so first up, I'd just like to let everyone know that while I've spent a little time just with helping some SB20 teams out, I actually haven't sailed the boats much. So this presentation is just based on what I've found out by modelling the rig of SB20 in our Doyle Sails rig analysis program. So it's not a perfect match, but it's probably close enough that it should sort of make sense. And you know, you can see even with this opening page here, it's the similar conditions. I've set a run up in 10 knots there, and you can see that they're sadly matched. but we'll just jump into it from here. So first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about riding moment, because it's pretty important in an SB20. They're pretty tippy boats, and it seems that with low heel angles, it's the crew weight which makes the biggest difference. So you can see in this graph here that, you know, with the crew weights is the red line there. So at 0 degrees heel, you know, the crew's got basically, you know, all the contribution to the riding moment. And it's only when you start to heel, you know, you get a little bit of contribution from the keel, but it's still nearly all of it's coming from the crew. So you can see this is a representation roughly of 240 grams of crew weight. And if we go to the next slide, with 270 kilos, you know, you can see that the riding moment that you have available jumps up quite a bit. So, you know, when we get up to the top of the wind range, like before you get overpowered, or even when you're overpowered, if you've got more crew weight over the side, it's going to basically just translate into better performance. So we'll just get that one out of the way nice and early. And I'll just talk for a couple of minutes about a bit about nomenclature for the rig and for sails as well, so that we all sort of can speak the same language. So I had a bit of a look at the stuff on the internet about tuning SB20s, and I think I've got this matched up to what the tuning guides generally have. So when we talk about the rigging, the standing rigging, the D's stands for diagonals. So you've got the lowest one, which comes off your GNAV position on the mast, is called the D1s. D2s go from the shroud's base to the bottom spreader, and the D3s from the spreader to the hound's position. And then with the V's, that stands for verticals, and we've got the V1 is the main one that you adjust. V2 is the second, you know, is between the two spreaders, and then the cap's just on the top of that. When we talk about rig tension, so, you know, always we're looking at, you know, we're referring rig tension to a loose gauge. In this presentation, I've just done everything off the PT1M, which is the kilogram version of the loose gauge, and you can see on the left that's what I've tuned my model to. So for the light conditions, it's set up with 28-24. The medium it's 31-30, and the heavy is 36-34. And with that that little spreadsheet there, you can see my rig model, I've put in 4mm 19 strand pre-stretch. Oh, sorry, not pre-stretch, just standard wire rigging. And these are the reductions that I had to make in my rigging to get those tensions. It may or may not correlate to what you end up doing on the boat, but it's not. I don't think it's too far different. When we talk about sail shapes, we define sail shapes in terms of these 5 points here. So we're looking at camber is used to describe the percentage depth of the sail. We have the draft, which defines the position of the maximum camber. We have the twist, which is the angle of the chord line there, which is this dashed line off either the boom, or it can be referred to off the center line of the boat. We have the entry, which is the forward part of that line there. It's just the actual, probably about the first 3% of the chord line. It's just it represents the angle of that to either the boom or to the centerline. And same with the exit. The exit is that last little bit of the leech, and again, it can be measured in relation to the chord or to the centerline. In the cases that I'm going to show you with the rest of the presentation, we're going to use the angles are all going to be off the center line of the boat, because you know, when you're looking at the boat from behind, or even when you're looking up the sails, I think that's a pretty common way to refer to a sail, in particular the leech, whether what angle it's on in relation to the center line of the boat. So I just wanted to touch on one thing, because it's something that, it's not just, it's actually many classes where I talk to customers and I talk to sailors, and it's something that I've seen also in the SB20s is it's a question about, does the entry angle on the jib or the depth affect pointing? And so what I'd just like to do here is just run through this photograph here, which is of an Etchells jib. And using the numbers, I just want to show you what, how they might relate. So if we look down here, this is the entry angles off the center line of the boat. So we calculate that because we can find a center line, just based between the mast and the headstay, and just take that those angles there off that baseline. So we have an entry angle at the bottom stripe here of 57 degrees, and off the mid stripe it's 70.7 degrees, and I think it says 68.4 on the top stripe. So anyone want to have a bit of a guess at what apparent wind angle the boat sails in Etchell? It's pretty similar to a SB20. So if we know that the true wind angle is 45, or it's actually less, it's probably more like 40 degrees. The apparent wind angle is going to be narrower than that, isn't it? So if you're guessing less than 30, you're doing well. Less than 25, yep. It's going to be more like about 21 or 22 degrees. So what does this tell us? Well, it basically tells us that we're bending the wind a long way in front of the rig. We're bending it, maybe not a long way in front of the rig, but we're bending it an awful lot. So in this case, up to 49 degrees, we're bending the wind so that it will flow over the jib without backwinding the sail. So hopefully you sort of understand that, and based on that, you can see that it's not the entry angle or the depth of the jib which is defining how close the boat's pointing to the breeze. So I think it's just a good thing to know when you're when you're trying to set up a jib. It's not always that you want to have a flat entry or a flat jib when you're trying to point. More, it's about the relationship of the mainsail and the jib. All right, so with the rest of this presentation, what I'm looking at is I'm just going to talk quickly. I've set up 4 cases, one at 6 knots, one at 10, one at 14, and one at 18 knots. And it's just a matter that, all right, we've got tuning guides and they say to set things up a certain way, but the most important thing is to try and actually figure out what are you trying to do with the rig and with the sail shapes. So for 6 knots, normally in most boats, and I don't think the SB20 is any different, you're looking at developing most of your power with the jib. So you're looking for a deep shape, and a deeper shape does need a bit more twist to stop it from, that exit angle from becoming negative. And you want to couple that usually with a flat mainsail, because the mainsail is going to be providing you pointing. And if you've got a deep mainsail, you'll find it's very easy to stall it when you trim it tight. So it's a lot easier to actually set the main up flatter, and then you can trim it tighter without stalling it as easily. So that's usually the goal for me when in the light stuff, when you're setting up a sail. So this is my model running in 6 knots of breeze, and with those base settings. And this little area here is just, again, it's just telling us what the depth is. This is the depth at the foot and going up the sail. And then we have the position of the draft, the twist, and it's basically going at quarter height, half height, 3/4 height, and then the head. So in the light, you're looking for power, and you're also looking for, again, with the main having it as fairly flat. It's very hard to flatten off the SB20 mainsail, so it's always a bit of a compromise. You're trying to sail with the leech as firm as you can, but without stalling it. So, but you can see there's still quite a bit of twist there in my model here, and you can see where my mouse pointing here that that upper batten is parallel more or less to the center line of the boat. There are times in flat water when you can bring it a little further in than that, but it's very difficult to sustain that, because it's usually when you'll start to stall that the leech, and you'll see that with the telltale. The uppermost telltale will be flowing, less than 50% of the time. So I'll move on to 10 knots of breeze. So in 10 knots, we still haven't reached maximum power yet. We're still underpowered. And but what we can find is that with a more wind velocity, you can trim the sails a lot tighter without stalling them. So it's going to be around 10 knots where you're actually trimmed with your main, probably with the most tension that of any time in the wind range. It might be 11 knots. If you're a really heavy team, it might be 12 knots. And same with the jib. You can come a lot, the maximum inboard with your sheeting, and you can trim it as firm as you like. And again, with the depth, you're still probably looking to have as much depth as you can up until the point where you start to become overpowered. So you probably won't, if you don't have the image of the 6 knots in your mind, you probably won't see it easily, but the mainsail here is trimmed a lot firmer and the jib's a lot further. It's all the way on the inside of the track. And we don't have any backstay. It's all just main sheet tension. And we go to 14. So now at 14 knots, at least with my model, and I'm pretty sure it's the same on the SB20s, we're definitely overpowered. So, when I'm running my model, I try to keep it under that, if we're looking at, say, a 14-degree heel, what the side force is there, I'll try and match that up to what I have in my rig model. And I find myself that I've got to ease the main and flatten out the top quite a bit to reduce the roll moment on the boat. And we're starting to flatten the jib off as well. So we're starting to think about twisting the top of the jib. We're using more backstay on the main because we want to keep the headstay tighter, and that helps flatten off the jib. And yes, we're everything with the main. We're trying to really flatten the top of the rig as much as we can, so that we lower the centre of effort. So we've got 40 knots here. You can see that the top's really quite flat here now and twisted. And then we go to 18 knots, where we're fully overpowered here. So again, we'd probably consider going outboard on the jib car, and a good, probably a good thing to keep in mind is if it depends a lot on how far you've got to drop the boom on the boat. And Darren, just pipe in here if you like. But generally, if your boom starts to come down to leeward, that's the time when you can start thinking about bringing your jib a little further outboard as well, so that that relationship stays the same.
Yeah, if you've got your, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
If you do have a situation where you're getting too overpowered and you're happy with the mast setup and the mainsail's matching the mast bend and the whole 9 yards, the whole goal is not to over twist the jib so that you have to sail inside the luff of the jib all the time. So the biggest problem with easing the jib so much, if you've got the jib car too far inboard, is that the sail also gets deeper, as a general rule of thumb, in the bottom part of the sail as well, especially. So quite often I'll just try and set maybe the bottom 2 battens on the leech of the mainsail, like if we're really backwinded, and then go outboard enough so that that's possible. And you'll tell straight away if it's an issue, because if you have to trim the mainsail on too hard to stop it from flapping, the heel angle comes on too hard. And so then that's a good sign when you've got to go outboard on the jib, and maybe you can shed a little bit tighter with a touch less twist so that you can at least set the bottom leech of your mainsail. And again, the biggest problem with the mainsail not setting and flapping all the time is that it deloads and loads the rudder all the time. And so next thing you know, the helmsman's having a hard time trying to steer through the water. And so the whole goal is to try and keep him a constant load and a constant rudder angle. And it all revolves around how you want to set your mainsail up. And if you can't set your mainsail up properly, you've just got to keep on going wider on the jib track. And sometimes I think if memory serves me correct, we might go as far as 5, or if it's really windy, maybe even 6 or 4 to 6 holes out from the inboard end of a SB20 jib track. And again, it's just so that I can keep the bottom third of the leech of the mainsail working. It doesn't matter if the top half's flapping, but the bottom third of the leech of the mainsail needs to work so that you can keep a constant load and a constant angle on the rudder, and it'll just make the boat sail a lot easier through the water. So it's a good indicator as to when you need to go outboard.
So this is our 18 knots, and this is where, again, there's a lot of options with how you go about sailing the boat when you're overpowered. So this is what I thought my trim will be, because it achieves the objective that it keeps the roll moment to where I think is what the maximum is for the boat. And it's pretty much as Darren said, it's the jib car's out. There's a little bit of hang on, and probably not enough. But the thing is, I've got the boom in, the boom's not too far outboard. So, and you can see here that bottom batten is pretty much still parallel to the center line of the boat. So we're driving off the bottom of the mainsail. There's nothing at all happening in the top. And you can see it here again with the, we're using a lot of backstay and, with a lot of twist in the jib. This is just an overlay of all of those 4 wind speeds with the with the different trim setups as well, different rig tensions to suit each condition. So a little bit messy, but you can see, the black was the 6 knots, and you can see that gradually as the wind increases, the mast tip's coming further aft. The headstay sag doesn't change too much, but you can see the twist is obviously gets bigger as you come up through the wind range. The only thing I would say is that with the mainsail here, you can see at 6 knots, the leech is a little more open than the 10 knots, which, as I said before, that's the time when you're probably at your maximum trim, minimum twist on the mainsail. This is just a graph which is a description of the mast bends that you have, again with those tuning parameters, and so this is the fore and aft bend here on the left, and then you've got the sideways bend on the right. So it's pretty obviously there's a lot of the most bend you have there is with the 18 knot case, and that's just flattening out your mainsail quite a bit. And then the interesting thing is, basically from 14 knots, when you've, 13 knots, when you reach your maximum riding moment, the rig doesn't really fall over any more than that, because you're starting to depower. So, the tip gets to a certain point and it more or less stays, or it may even start to straighten up a little bit in the top sideways, but it actually starts to load up more down low, because that's where you're driving off the bottom of the rig. You're driving off the bottom of the jib and the main, so it tends to load up the mast more, and so oftentimes that's where you find you might need more D2 tension than maybe what's in the tuning guide. If you're actually sailing in a high wind constantly, sort of up around 18 knots, sort of median wind speed. So, yeah. I was going to just show a little bit something. The numbers that we have for the tuning guides that are around are just basically they're generic settings. So they're a really good starting point if we just new in the class and we've just bought ourselves a boat and we rig the things up, and we want to know, how do we, what do we do, to get the boat through the range. But there's a lot of variation in the boats, even though they're one design. They're sailing boats are complex pieces of equipment, and they're made up of many parts. And a lot of the time when you put it all together, you can find that they're, one sail can look quite different to another. And this is just an example that we're looking at here, where we set up the same boat with 2 different mainsails, exactly the same wind conditions and exactly the same settings. It was basically we just dropped one main and pulled up the next and went out. And it was the chap here was wanting to try and pick a sail to use for regatta, and so you can see again, just looking at the numbers from these digitized photo images, that there's actually a really pretty noticeable difference in the flying shape. So part of my work in sail design is to review the numbers and to basically some part of that might be to say how we might depart from a standard tuning guide to bring those sail shapes closer together to an ideal shape. So it might be that you start off with tuning guide standard numbers, but if you find like this mainsail on the right is generally a little bit deeper than the one on the left, we would probably have to set up things a little bit differently with that. We may need to have the mast bend more fore and aft, And if that doesn't work, we might have to see whether we could also flatten the main slightly more by introducing more sideways bend in the mast. So that's just the same thing at 18. You know, we've just basically got a representation of each of those mast bends, fore and aft here on the left and sideways on the right. The white ones here are just the dock tune bends of those 3 settings. Right, we're not far from the end, so we could either take a little break now, or I can run through the next one.
Andrew, we just had a question. You might be able to see it on the chat from, I think, Will Sargent. Can you touch on the relationship between the main and the jib? They found that focusing on the slot and understanding the flow of the jib into the main being something really important to focus on in a strong breeze, the swinging barn door effect. Can you comment on that?
Maybe Twirler.
What does that mean? What is this? What is the swinging barn door effect?
Will Sargent, you're online, aren't you? So you can unmute yourself and fill us in.
Can you hear me?
Gotcha. Yes, we can.
That's probably just my lingo when I say the barn door, but it's just like one thing we found and saw a lot of other people doing is when you've got your traveller too far low or you're easing too much, and kind of how that easing of the main then starts hitting into the flow off the jib, and how you start to lose traction and stall quite a bit. Like that's something that we probably ran the highest traveller out of the fleet, and we found we could get traction for longer. I don't know, like it's just something that it's because if you have your main too far ease and it starts going into the flow off the jib, then you start to get more drag. Is that right?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, Will, as long as you've got a mainsail that's not inverting, then I think you're okay. You know, like, I mean, there's 1,000 instances that in scenarios that'll change. The biggest, I mean, generally you find if you carry the traveller quite high, you still will be boom quite down. I don't think that you'll see, like, I'm not sure what sort of, maybe like, let's call it 14 knots a breeze. I don't think you'll see the boom or the end of the boom position in too much of a different spot on any boat, no matter where the traveller is. So like one guy might be centre trav and sheeted tighter, or, you know, or yourself, if you're really high trav, you might be sheeted a little softer. And then of course the vang comes into it, and how much twist are you carrying? You know, like, I mean, we carry the traveller quite high on a lot of instances. For example, in a sea breeze condition in Tasmania, in the Derwent, so that you can carry more twist. And so the boom would be still in about the same spot, but it would allow you to carry more twist having the traveller up. And so as long as your mainsail, as long as the leech of the mainsail's set, whether it's a trav down, tighter sheet, firm leech in maybe a westerly, or whether it's a trav up, you know, more twisty sail in a sea breeze condition where it's a lot more bumpy. You know, both instances, as long as the mainsail's not flapping and flogging, then I think you're in a good spot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Kind of going off the leech a bit more. That makes sense.
As long as the leech of the mainsail's set, like, it's up to you to figure out whether you want to, you know, how powered up you are, or how much D1 and D2 you have on, which obviously makes a difference to the depth off the front of the mainsail. But as long as you've got, as long as your mainsail's not flapping, which happens a lot, with bad rig setups and stuff, you see it all the time, and the boats just go sideways. And as I said before, the biggest problem with that is that it deloads and loads the rudder up all the time. And so you're never able to carry a constant rudder angle. And so my goal all the time is to try and keep the leech of the mainsail set so that the rudder angle stays constant, because that also helps with your height as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for that.
Yeah, it's actually this bit about the Vang here actually it leads in a little bit into that. If you just have a look at the bottom graph here with the fore and aft bend, it basically shows that, you know, the more Vang you pull on, the more it affects the bottom of the mast, and even to the extent where the top actually starts to straighten out a little bit. Now, this isn't what you want to have happen when you get up range, because what that does is actually it flattens the bottom of the mainsail, and that's what makes the helm really unstable. And it doesn't actually, you know, help flatten the top of the main. So, you know, it might even, you know, in extreme case, make it still, you know, leave some depth up there. So I'm always a little bit wary of using the Vang if you've got the strength with the main sheet to control the leech with the main and traveller. That's usually the preferred method, because what it does is it tends to bend, the bend point of the mast is a lot higher, and it tends to keep the top nice and flat and still keep a little bit of power in the bottom. And again, just, you know, I think if you have a situation like this one where you can see that you're getting those overbend wrinkles in the bottom there, a lot of mast bend down low, that's probably getting to the stage where you want to be, you know, backing off the Vang a little bit perhaps, and a little more backstay instead, and just control a little bit more with main sheet tension. Yeah, so you can see, I don't know if it'll probably be better to look through this presentation later, but most of the depth change is in the bottom of the mainsail. So, you know, you've got, without any Vang on at all in 14 knots, you've got a bottom depth is 8.3, I think it is, with 25 millimeters of additional Vang. That's, you know, the sliding, your GNAV slide, that's pretty getting up there. You've already dropped over 1% of depth. It's 1.3% flatter. And then you go to, you know, down to you know, a bit over 5% for when you pull the Vang on even further. So much less effect on the top of the sail. So,
just,
you know,
sorry, so Andy here. Twirler, just putting all that into action and on the water, that the theory of it. Can you talk us through how the helm and the main trim work together to adjust the main sheet traveller backstay through the gust response and trying to keep the height and optimum heel and good helm loading like you talked about? How does that interact between the two of you? Who does what string?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually one of the questions. So, how we operate is I'll do the main sheet and the traveller, and then probably 75% of the time, actually, Brett will do the backstay, and then Nick will do the Vang. So it's sort of split in between, and then depending on, like for instance, if there's a puff coming on, I would like to see, you know, before the puff hits that the backstays come on, you know, and then I can ease the main sheet, and then you know, maybe even a little bit of Vang ease depending on what sort of twist profile we're getting. But as the main sheet eases, if there's a little puff on, and, you know, maybe the jib will ease at the same time, so all the sails go out together and get twisted evenly together. And so the boat tends to, hopefully, the goal is to have the boat heel angle not change, and instead all that power go into pushing the boat forward rather than in heel angle and then obviously going sideways. So the process that we do again is primarily Brett will do the backstay, and then I will just call when I want it on and off. Nix does the bowman does the vang, and I will just call when I want it on and off. And then I would go, and then he'll do the jib sheet as well, and then I will do the main sheet, depending on how the heel angle is and whether the mainsail's flapping or what sort of rudder angle Brett's got on his tiller.
So in that gusty conditions, when all the tensions are changing quite quickly, less able to organise yourself into a gust response, what's the tool you're using there? Is that Traveller or main sheet?
Main sheet.
Okay.
Main sheet. You just can't. I think that the Traveller is good in certain conditions, but if it's really gusty, like a typical Hobart westerly, the main sheet is king of everything. And but you can't. You've only got a certain, like if you don't adjust the jib, you've only got a certain range that you can go in and out of the main sheet before the mainsail starts flapping. You know, as Sarge said about, you know, the flow off the back of the you know, out through the back of the slot of the jib. You know, like you use the main sheet too much, you've only got to find narrow lane before the main will start flapping. And then if the mainsail starts flapping again, I'll go back to the rudder angle being trying to keep it as static as possible. Is that you know, then you watch the poor old helmsman sitting there, doesn't know whether he's Arthur or Martha. Like he's trying to push up, push down, push up, push down, because the load keeps coming on and off the back of the boat, and it's the primary sail that's got to drive it through it. So not only does the mainsail go in and out, but the jib goes in and out just as fast.
Okay.
Andrew, there's a couple of questions. One from John Bateman. Can you comment on the relationship between the jib exit and backwind on the luff of the mainsail and how to manage that?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to sort of talk about actually a lot about what's happening there. I mean, it's still not perfectly clear to me, and I've been in this business for 30 years trying to figure out what's going on. And but what it's you know, I think like Darren said, you know, that the important thing is that, you know, the relationship of the twist of both sails is pretty important to keep that in sync, and that's again where trimming stuff, you know, both sheets in and out together is a really key part of keeping good performance and keeping a really balanced helm. You know, people say, oh, you know, you shouldn't have the leech of the jib close to the mainsail. Well, you know, I spent a lot of time, you know, poring over photos of those America's Cup version 5 rigs back in, you know, in at the end of the last century again, and the version 5 boats had massive roaches on the genoas, and, you know, going upwind that nearly touched the back of the mainsails. So what's happening there is that you have a really slow speed of airflow between the jib and the main, and this is where you're getting all this wind bending from, is that you're slowing the pressure down between the jib and the main, but it's really accelerating around the outside of the jib. But so, you know, there's just based on, you know, and it was the same with the Volvos too. They used to have like their J1 genoas would also be really close to the back of the main. So it's never bothered me that about them getting close, but definitely, you know, as we've already identified, when you're getting up in the range and you ease the main out too far, it's definitely, you know, becomes a problem, and maybe that's because it's starting to get closer to that accelerated flow outside of the jib, and then there's less pressure differential then, and that's what causes the main to go, to backwind basically. So that's all the theory. How do you get around it? Well, again, like it just comes back to that, the more balanced you are with your sheeting on both the jib and the main, the more balanced the boat will be and the better the performance will be.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Yeah, it's something we always struggle with and trying to get right, but thanks for your answer.
We might finish off the presentation now, Andrew, and then see how we go with time for questions. We might be able to run over for a little bit of time, or even have another session if we can't get through all our questions. So,
well, I've probably got just a couple of slides, so I'll just quickly go through. So, just with this Vang again, you can see the other thing that happens when you use a lot of Vang is, and you bend the bottom of the rig a lot, is that you compress the mast, and then what happens then is your forestay starts to get soft, but at the same time, because it's compressing, the headstay height gets lower too, and your jib starts twisting more. So those are bad and a good nearly cancel each other out. So it's not so big a deal there, but you do get the bottom of the mainsail really flat, and you lose a little power out of there, which is probably not ideal. So because you're trying to drive off the bottom of the sails. I just want to quickly talk about jib luff tension because, again, we've got a chance to model it, and I just wanted to confirm perhaps for some people what difference it makes when you go up range. So I've just done a quick series here where we've done 3 different trims. Let me see, the green one is with the tack line eased, and black is middle, and then red is, I think black is like plus 8mm tension, and then red is plus another 8mm. So in total 16mm, and it affects most the depth in the bottom of the jib, so much less in the top. So, but it does make up to a percent difference in the depth between that 16mm of change in the tack tension. So that's pretty substantial, and so that's why it is a pretty key control in the boat for flattening the head sail. And then just a bit more about backstay tension again. If we were to compare the mast bend of where we were just using Vang, you can see when we're just using backstay that actually that bend point is a lot higher up the rig, and that's why it's a more important control for for when you get overpowered and you want to flatten off the top more than any other part of the sail. So so that's it. So I think that's, again, just changing the backstay trim, you get those you end up with more twist basically if the main stays the same, and the mast tip comes back, it just opens up the leach. That's the same thing again. We can see that the roll moment drops, considerably. So if you've pulled the backstay on and you come into a lull, the first thing you've got to do is just ease that backstay off, because if you're not at your maximum riding moment, you're just going to be off the pace. So really important that probably the most distance lost around the course is after a gust, when the wind drops, and the time that it takes boats to respond and repower up is where I see the biggest losses in high level competitions. With the more backstay, we do get more headstay tension, but it doesn't seem to affect too much the actual depth. It certainly rounds up the front of the jib a lot though. So and then also you can see that the main sheet tension gets less as you pull more backstay on. That's obviously because it's twisting more. So I think that's about it. Yeah, we're done for the tech side.
Fantastic. we've got about 6 minutes or so. I've got a question from Greg, who's online tonight, and whether you can answer this one quickly, Darren, or not. I've lost my chat. Do you mind clarifying who does what on the boat you sail so we can better understand puff response, the puff response that you just talked through?
Sorry, Jane, just say the question.
Just if you could clarify who does what on the boat that you sail so that we can better understand puff response, the puff response you just talked through.
Sorry, can I just jump in? Hi there, Darren. It's Greg here. Just when you were explaining how you respond to a gust or increasing breeze came on, you mentioned a number of names on your boat, and I just wasn't sure who was in what role. I'm still getting my head around. Does the helmsman play the main sheet?
Yeah. So as a general rule of thumb, again, let's pick a nice Hobart westerly in 14 to 18 knots, so it's quite puffy. So the helmsman, as a general rule of thumb, would do the backstay adjustment. The main sheet trimmer would do the traveller and the main sheet, and the bowman would do the vang and the jib. Depending on the scenario, the bowman's actually quite busy. When it gets puffy, he's busy with in and out in the jib all the time. And on our boat, I get him to basically watch the mainsail. So I do tactics and try and have an overview of how the boat's going through the water and whatnot. Chatting to the helmsman and heel angle and rudder angle and the whole 9 yards. So I get him actually in a main trimmer's role to be looking at the mainsail. So I'll be playing the main sheet by feel, and then depending on what's happening with the rudder angle, and then I'll be talking to the helmsman about, okay, puff coming on, backstay on now, and then I can ease the main sheet a little bit at the same time. And so I'm fine balancing the main sheet tension dependent on how much backwind I have. And then the jib trimmer will be watching the mainsail as well, and he'll be easing the jib out. So if I get a little flap in the mainsail, then the jib goes out straight away. Yeah, okay. Okay, so and the whole goal is and I always say to all the jib trimmers is for them to make my life hard. But I don't want to flap a mainsail for too long, So and it just cuts the torque down. So you just end up with him controlling how much flap I've got. And so if I'm going, okay, if I'm easing a little bit more, then maybe the next tack I might go, okay, we're going to go 2 holes wider on the jib car for the next tack. Okay. Because he's easing too much. Yeah. All right. But basically that's how the communication works.
Great. Thanks, Darren. And thank you all for the presentation tonight. Fantastic.
How are we going, Jane? We run out of time.
No, we can pack a lot in 2 minutes.
Yes,
Andy, you've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, I could dive in with it. A couple. Just a lot of this is balancing a whole lot of things. I wonder if you could talk, Gust Twirler, trading all this off now with the balance on the helm. Sometimes perfectly set sails, you end up with a boat that's quite out of balance, and the helmsman's doing funny things trying to get the boat to feel right and go up the right heel. So are you using the jib, for example, the depth of the jib to get balance in the boat, or you pretty much just it's all about the main and the helm angle?
It's pretty much all about the main. So we work quite hard on not only the jib clew position, because there's obviously options in the clew board, but also the jib height. And so that jib height and the jib clew position changes all the time depending on how much twist we're carrying and how much twist we want to carry. That because you obviously don't have a fore and aft jib track, so you have to control the shooting angle of the jib with the up and down on the halyard and with the up and down on the clew board. And so depending on again which wind condition, if we can get that set up right for the right amount of twist we want, then basically the mainsail will control pretty much the whole setup of the boat.
Okay.
Another
question. People have seen your preparation before a regatta. How and why is it important to have the keel, rudder, and rig centered?
Yeah, it's super important. Like, I mean, I think that one thing that people need to be aware of is that this is a class that comes out of the factory, and you pretty much can't touch it. The sails are one design, the rigs are one design, the rigging, the shrouds, you can't adjust forestay lengths, you can't adjust anything. And so you have to have quite an open mind about what may or may not be symmetric or asymmetric, or what, you know, some guys got a longer forestay than the other, and it happens because the things get produced in bulk, and one day someone's got a hangover and someone hasn't. And it's the same with the building of the boat. It's just the way it works. And so to get out there on the race course and be going, how come we're slower this tack than the next tack or whatever, you can eliminate all of that just by setting the boat up to start with. And so what I do in a basic form is basically set the boat up on a hull level, so that I know where the hull's sitting in the water, like when it's sitting dead flat with the keel down, and I just do that with the water level. And then you've got some leniency with packing of the keel in the keel box to be able to move the keel from one side or the other if you think that's a little bit asymmetric. I don't think you can adjust the rudder tabs on the gudgeons, but then once you've got that all leveled up, then I laser the rig to make sure that the rig's centered. And once I've got that all set up and everything's even and whatnot, then at least I know when I go out in the water to go sailing, I'm going, okay, everything's symmetric. You know, we're struggling one tack and not the other tack. Well, at least I can eliminate all that in my head and go, okay, well, it's a problem with my trim or my setup, or the rig's out of whack. And then I just go back and check my rig settings and all that sort of stuff. And generally you can come back and you'll be symmetric again. But it is definitely an issue with any mass-produced one design boat.
Okay. So looking at the rig again a bit more, one of the mysteries in the bar is usually the cap shroud discussion that never seems to come to a conclusion. So perhaps Andrew, if you could explain the role of the cap shrouds, and should they be tight, loose? What's their role in this type of boat?
Yeah, I mean, you don't, if you look at the boats in the car park, you can see, or sorry, in the boat park, I guess, you can see that there's not much above the hound position. You know, you've got a little triangle of mainsail there. So it's not, the spreaders really aren't going to help you much. Those top spreaders aren't really helping you much to do anything except when you've got the Jenica up, you know, to stop the tip of the mast breaking off. So upwind, it's probably worse to have tension on that than have none at all, because if there's tension on it, you're going to tend to pull the tip to windward because the spread is still quite long, and so you'll lose a lot of the, you know, your gust response out of the rig. You know, at least if there's not much tension, or it's actually loose when you're going upwind, the tip can be a little more reactive, and that's not a bad thing. So even if your setup is, you know, if you're in that base setting, that you might just have, you know, maybe zero tension on it. As you pull your backstay on, and the tip comes aft, it's going to get loose anyway. So you know, it should just kind of neutralise those upper shrouds anyway. What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, I think that so as a general rule of thumb, I don't carry any tension on those upper shrouds at all. Like, no, if it was me, I would take them off the boat and the spreaders.
Yep.
Like, get rid of them. The rig will never fall down. Like, I mean, it's fine.
Yep.
So then you just reduce to a normal rig setup, and you've got like your V1s, V2s, D1s, D2s, and then that's it, and take the others out of the equation. So when someone's setting their rig up, they shouldn't worry too much about those those upper shrouds and the spreaders. They should basically set them up, set the rig up with them with zero tension on whatsoever, like have them flapping in the wind. And then then once you've done your final setup and you've got your cap shroud tension and everything set up, then you can just go and take them up, just hand tight and lock them off and leave them. As long as it's symmetric from tack to tack, you can just leave them. And I think everyone would for the most part, should see when you pull the backstay on that they go loose anyway. And what Andrew is saying about the gust response, it's a big thing, the boats don't have a lot of riding moment anyway. And you've only got 270 kilos sitting on the side of the boat and no one can hike. And so gust response is a big player in how the boat goes through the water. And if those top shrouds are too tight, there's no movement in the mast. And then obviously there's no automatic twist mode for when the mast goes sideways. And there's no way for the top of the main to flatten out when it does go sideways. And so you just don't go fast through the water, and you just go, and the boat tips over.
Okay. Probably I think we've got room for one more, Jane.
I reckon we've probably got, if it's okay with the team, maybe three or four more questions.
Okay.
It'd be nice to get through these. I can see another one that's come up on the chat, Andrew, from Scott. Maybe if we go to that one and then a few more of the other ones that have been sent through.
Okay. I haven't quite got the chat, but I've got one more here. If you could do the chat in a sec, I'll just do this one.
In fact, Scott, if you want to unmic yourself, Scott Glanville, you can ask that directly if you like.
Evening all. My comment was that when the Worlds were in Hobart, the young Frenchman, Robin Folin, he sent his trimmer or forehand up the mast after every day's race and was playing with the caps or D3s or something up there based on setting the top of the mast due to whatever the next day's forecast was likely to be. What significance would that have based on the fact that both of you had just said the caps really have no importance on sail setup?
No, I don't know why he would do it the day before. The only boat that I know that actually sails with them super tight, because I see their V2s quite loose, so they take up on the V1s, and then I see the V2s quite loose. And I saw this sitting at the dock in Tasmania and in France. Was what's the old mate's name? The English guy.
Gary Hill.
What's that boat called? Yeah, that's who it was.
Oh,
what's the boat called?
Was Sports Boat World, not Marvel.
No.
Marvel.
No. Anyway, one of the guys.
John Pollard in Excellent.
Yeah, John Pollard. That's him. Yeah, I haven't seen it before, and but I'm pretty sure that's how he sails. I'm pretty sure that he uses the cap shrouds going through the top of the rig. And I've been side by side him a few times, and it hasn't been anything like chalk and cheese. But my opinion, I think Andrew's opinion is the same. Is that the jumpers or the caps or whatever you want to call them, I think that you're better off forgetting about them.
Yeah.
As a general rule of thumb.
Yeah, the only thing that might change is, again, if you've got a mainsail shape that is quite different to everyone else's for whatever reason, production problem, sometimes a lot of people just will try a lot of different things just to try and resolve that. So, again, it's the tuning numbers are a guide, and you still have to have in mind what you're trying to achieve with your sail shapes, because that'll influence how you depart from those standard trims.
So just looking at that further down the mast with the GNAV, with your sail sitting on one side of the GNAV or the other, do you do anything asymmetric in your setup to compensate for that, Twirler?
It used to really make me quite angry looking at it all the time, and now I just go, no, I just leave the mast symmetric and just go, you just deal with it. So one tack, basically, you can carry some more bang than the other tack. if you want to flatten it out. And that's the way, and that's how I do it.
Okay.
Maybe 2 more questions, Andrew, I reckon, and then we'll probably call it a night.
If you had a choice between the silver or the black mast, which would you choose? And is there a difference?
The aluminium goes soft over a period of time, for sure. We just switched to a new rig for the Nationals just gone by, and the biggest issue is trying to keep tuning out the stretch in the shrouds. That's the biggest issue. The section I thought was fine, but I didn't, and I thought maybe we had an edge on the black mast from previous years, but yeah, I would say the only thing I'd say is that a newer rig would be a little bit stiffer outside of the fact of whether it's black or silver.
And if you've got an older rig, we have one question that someone says they can't get their mast straight in dock unless they've got 20 on one side and 18 on the other. Are they better off having a straight mast with uneven shroud tensions, or having even shroud tensions and a slightly out of plumb mast?
Well, it's just got to be symmetric on the water. You know, long story short, a lot of the rigs come with the spreader attachments on the mast and everything all ready to go, and then they come with the spreaders pre-drilled as well. And so if you measure, for instance, under load from let's say the spreader tips to the forestay either side, I think you would find it would be a little bit asymmetric. And then, you know, trying to find a symmetric one that's out of the factory straight away would be quite difficult. And then if you measured the spreader poke on all the rigs, I think you would find that all a little bit inconsistently asymmetric as well. And those things make quite a bit of difference. But, you know, generally you can tune them out fore and aft with the D1s and the D2s. But, you know, it's just something that you got to deal with. And I think that, as Andrew's been saying through his presentation there, you know, like, I mean, the generic rig guide is fine if you just jump on the boat and you want to make sure you sort of half okay going along, but it's all about you know, you get a new mate, eyes in the boat, and knowing how to adjust the shrouds to it to get the same to the same place that you were with your last setup.
Okay.
Okay, I think the last comment we've got from Duarte in Portugal is promote pre-bend with cap shrouds in light wind to open mainsail top ledge? Question mark?
Sorry, we just say that again.
So it says, Duarte, if you're online there, I'm happy for you to unmute yourself and to ask that question directly to Andrew and Darren. But he said promote pre-bend with cap shrouds in light wind to open the mainsail top ledge.
Yes, if you tighten the cap shrouds, you can bend the mast in the upper part of the mast, so you get a open mainsail there.
Oh, okay, right. So maybe that's what
some people tighten the backstays in light wind to open the mainsail, which is I don't like because it takes the sag of the jib.
Yep. Yeah, it might be worth to play around with. You know, if you can do it on shore, you know, yeah, you'd need to use quite a bit of tension there because I think it's only 3mm wire and 1x19 wire. So yeah, that might work. But yeah, so the downside is then though that you know, as soon as the breeze came up a little bit, you're at risk of being stuck in one mode. So yeah, you know, it depends maybe on where you're sailing. If you're really confident that you're going to get a light condition for, you know, however long you need, then it might be worth to do that, you know, to flatten off the top of the main, because, you know, for sure in light weather, a key to the performance is actually getting the main as flat as you can. so that you can trim it tight, and that'll give you your pointing. And generally with these boats, it seems that the game mostly is in, can you outpoint the guy, on your hip or whatever.
So just exploring that under 5 knots, if you've got the objective of getting a flat top main, one suggestion is using the backstay, but they might end up tightening up your forestay. And if you're after a forestay sag, you get some power in the jib, which is where's the balance points there?
Well, that's where you basically have to find another boat and set up 2 different trims, and that's the only way that you'll find whether it's going to work for the condition that you're aiming at.
Yep.
So there's no easy way.
Thank you.
Okay, look, I think that we might leave it there tonight. I think Steve did say to me we could talk about this all night, and I don't think he's wrong. Look, thanks very much to Andrew, Darren and Andy, and also thank you so much to everyone who's been online tonight, wherever you are in the world. We're really pleased that you've been able to join us, and Darren and Andrew particularly, thank you so much for your expertise, your technical knowledge. We hope we might be able to sneak you back on before the season starts for a little bit of extra tuition, but we really appreciate the time you've taken tonight. So over the next few sessions, we're going to be looking at some crew tips and tricks, so a little bit more of a bit more relaxed session where we're going to explore people's little tips and tricks for their crews. I've seen some people do some funny things, ropes between toes and teeth and all sorts of things, so we're going to have a nice opportunity to share some of those tips and tricks. We've invited our friends in Singapore to talk to us about sailing in Singapore. We'll also be looking at boat preparation, and we'll finish off with a presentation from our SB20 exec on the upcoming season. So thanks again so much for being involved tonight. Stay warm, stay safe. For those in the sun, enjoy the sun. And if you're on the water this weekend, sail well. We'll see you in a fortnight. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jane.
Yes. That was fantastic, Darren, Andrew and Andy.
Yeah,
lovely work.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could talk for
Nice
ages.
interaction. Nice interaction. It was good. Yeah.
You need another hour, Jane.
Well, look, I didn't want to put some pressure on because I thought I've already taken another 15 minutes of your time. But if you're keen to come back,
I'm happy to keep talking.
Steve's sitting here with the lasagna in the oven. His thing was too noisy and my internet was unstable, so I had to log off and ask this.
I had my pen ready to go and do a few diagrams and stuff, and then I looked at the clock as well, and I'm going, oh my God, this is.
I know. I thought, oh, this will take about 15 or 17 minutes, and then we'll have all this time. But it was so beautifully done, and it was just nicely paced, and yeah, it was fabulous.
The problem, like I didn't get to answer all the questions, obviously, that were there. I had them on the screen, the questions that you're asking, Andy, but
right. Just trying to bounce around to fit where you're at.
Yeah, no, that's all right. But it would be quite good to explain to people, because Andrew went through it quite technically and stuff, but to explain to people how the changes in the rig work, and how you can achieve the same result. It doesn't matter what mast or what mainsail or whatever you've got, but the rig tensions might be completely different. Mm-hmm. And for example, adjusting your diagonal shrouds and stuff make a massive difference to the sideways bend if there's no tension on the leeward side. But once the leeward side gets tensioned up, then all of a sudden it makes a massive difference to the fore and aft bend. Mm. Just all this stuff that is so hard with setting a rig up and everything that we probably didn't even get through, but we didn't even touch on it really. But you know what I mean, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. There's such a huge difference to how boats are set up and how they're sailing, and the other thing, as you said too, about rig stretch too, it's a massive one because you can see boats out there all the time with that. You know, some lured shrouds are super loose because they, you know, their wires stretching like hell, and yeah, you know, what do you do?
Well, it's you end up like, it's quite funny because we carry quite a soft D2, for example, and then obviously the D1s are primarily set for how much fang tension I want to carry. But I carry a soft D2 because the cap shrouds the diameter of the cap shrouds is too small, and so they stretch like, you know, a piece of shot cord. Yep. And so if you can set up your mast so that it's actually got some sag to leeward, then the stretch, it makes it a lot harder for the leeward cap to go soft by the time the windward cap stretches, because it's got to straighten the mast out before it can go sideways.
Right.
You know, like, I mean, just all those little tricks that work well in a class that's got a really stretchy cap shroud is quite good, you know, and that's where you find the guys that are carrying a little bit firmer leeward caps and whatever. And you hear of a lot of guys that go out and they don't do any adjustments, you know. But like, I was going to make a point that you know, we go through, I think, out of here, I think, and most of the guys are onto it now, but we go through 16 turns on the cap shrouds.
Wow, that's huge. Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
I mean, like, it says that you should come in with 36 on the caps and stuff. I mean, I've come in with 43 or something.
Wow.
You know, it's a massive difference.
Yeah.